When I was 10, my parents and I went to visit my grandmother for spring break. My cousin also came to visit, and we decided we wanted to go to the YMCA for the day. My grandmother dropped us off and said she would come back and pick us up in 4 hours. On that day, the YMCA was empty. There were a couple of adults in the exercise room, but that's it. We went to the basketball court, and after 2 hours of playing tag and shooting baskets, we were bored. I've never been the biggest fan of swimming, but this YMCA had a pretty cool pool, so we changed into our bathing suits and headed in there. The pool was empty except for the lifeguard. We played a bunch of games and swam laps, but after about an hour, there wasn't much left to do, and there was no one except us to hang out with to keep things interesting. So we decided to play a game of seeing how long we could hold our breath underwater. We stood in the shallow end near the clock on the wall so we could time ourselves. Instead of fully submerging, we just stuck our heads face down in the water. We did this a couple of times and I was winning. On our last round, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I figured it was my cousin giving up and telling me that I won, but instead, it was the lifeguard who told me to knock it off or she was going to have to ask us to leave the pool. Since we were tired of being in the pool, we figured we would get out, get dressed, and go back to the basketball court until my grandmother picked us up. We only had about an hour left anyways, and the water was freezing. As we got out, the lifeguard stopped us and asked if we wanted to go into the sauna to warm up and dry off. The sign said 18 years or older, so of course, we were super excited that she allowed us to do that. She walked us to the sauna and unlocked the door. The door was glass and the interior was made entirely out of wood. Inside, above the door, there was a clock, probably to help you make sure you were not in there for an unsafe amount of time. The lifeguard stand was adjacent to the sauna, but if you looked out the door, you could clearly see it. She followed us in and went over to the thermometer encased in plastic and unlocked it so she could crank up the heat. I figured that she must have to turn it on each time, so I didn't think anything of it. Both my cousin and I were very short girls, and so we couldn't see the temperature that was printed on the thermometer knob, but I know she was turning up the heat. Then she left and shut the door behind her. I thought I saw her lock the door too, but I thought to myself, why would she lock the door when we might want to get out? I checked the clock and we decided we should get out in 10 or 15 minutes. It was plenty warm in the sauna, but now the room was blazing. It felt nice because I was so cold from the pool. After about 15 minutes, it started to get a little too hot, and my cousin agreed that we should leave so we can get dressed. I went to turn the knob on the door, but it wasn't budging. I thought maybe it was jammed, so I shook it, but it still wasn't opening, and then I let my cousin try. She couldn't get it open either. We figured that the lifeguard would be back in a couple of minutes, so we sat back down and waited. The room was getting hotter now too. I really wanted to leave. I got up and started banging on the door, shaking, twisting the knob, trying to get the lifeguard's attention. My cousin got up and joined me. We started screaming at the top of our lungs for her to let us out, but she just stared straight ahead. I don't think there's any way that she couldn't have noticed or heard two little girls banging and kicking the door and screaming. Now, we had been in there for about 25 minutes. It was so hot in the sauna that it hurt to breathe. It felt like my lungs were on fire. My eyes and skin were burning. We sat back down and put our towels over our heads because they were still a little damp and it made it easier to breathe. I was so worried about my cousin as she's a couple years younger than me. I looked at the clock and saw that we had been in there for 35 minutes. I got up and walked to the door again and saw the lifeguard still just staring straight ahead. Again, I tried to get her attention by screaming that we needed out and banging on the door as hard as I could, but still nothing. I was starting to get pretty dizzy, so I went to go sit back down, but the wooden seats of the sauna burned my skin. My towel was completely dry, so I put it underneath me to sit on. My hair was also dry, but I wrapped it across my face to cover my nose, and I squinted my eyes so that they didn't burn as bad, but I could still watch if anyone might pass the door. It helped a little bit. My cousin was laying face down with the towel over her head, not moving or saying anything, so I nudged her to make sure that she was still okay. She was, but I could tell that we really needed to get out of there soon because she seemed a little bit disoriented. It had been 45 minutes now and I was extremely nauseous. There was no way that the lifeguard would forget that we were in there, and I thought she would come back soon, but there was a little voice in my head telling me that maybe she purposely locked us in there. Finally, a man walked past the room towards the pool, but for some reason, I just couldn't get up. My whole body was on fire and I felt so dizzy. Luckily, this man wasn't going to the pool. He wanted to be let into the sauna and came back with the lifeguard. I saw them walking this way and immediately jumped up to grab my cousin. I knew now that for sure she had locked us in there because she'd pulled out her keys to unlock the door and let the man in. I didn't want to take any chances of us being trapped in there any longer, so as the man was trying to walk in, I was trying to shove our way out. As we were going out, the lifeguard started trying to shut the door and push us back with it. The man was clearly confused about what was going on and said, I think they want out. The lifeguard let out a sigh and opened the door fully. We ran away as fast as we could into the changing room. We only had about 10 minutes before our grandmother was supposed to pick us up. We were both so shaken by what just happened that we didn't say anything to each other as we got dressed or on the car way home. When we got back to the house, my parents were making us dinner and I told them the story of what just happened. They thought I must have been exaggerating and they didn't believe me. I truly think that woman was going to let us cook alive in there. The only bit of doubt that I have is what would have happened if we actually did. She obviously would have gotten the blame. What was her end game? I'm 21 now, but I think about this interaction all the time, and when I'm in small spaces or get too warm, I still have panic attacks. No one believes the story, and I get it. It's pretty absurd. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask for opinions, but do you think this could have been some crazy misunderstanding? Or do you think that she really just loved us in there not to die? And why? So, to the lifeguard at the YMCA, please, let's not meet again. I've hesitated to share this story for a long time because I know how important the mutual trust between a resident and their landlord/maintenance staff is, and I don't want to instill any unnecessary distrust in anyone's landlord. I've shared stories before about dangerous and scary residences I've encountered while working at apartment complexes, but this is a story about my time on the other side of things as a renter. Before I had even graduated from high school, I knew I wanted to live at Paradise Apartments. I was a bit naive at the time, drawn in by the many amenities I would never use, but I primarily wanted to live there because the complex was pet friendly and within my small budget. When the time eventually came for me to get my own place, I sublet the only apartment they had available and moved in. Unfortunately, I came to realize the apartment wasn't as nice as I originally thought. The building was old but remodeled, so I had all the typical plumbing issues and thin walls. I also learned it was not the safest part of town. I was primarily an online student, but I had one class that met in person twice a week around 8 a.m. I'm a bit of a homebody, so I rarely left during the day except for that class, the occasional shopping excursion, or to spend time with my boyfriend in the evening after he got off work. My apartment was a bit of a Bermuda Triangle. Even though it was only 600 square feet and I lived alone, things had a way of growing legs and walking away. I had two kids at the time and blamed them regularly for these things disappearing. Something odd that kept reoccurring, however, was that I'd find my underwear box out and sitting in the center of my bedroom floor on days when I had class. I didn't have a proper dresser, instead of using an IKEA shelf with some IKEA boxes for designated clothes, socks, underwear, pajamas. I always could have sworn I'd put the underwear box away after getting ready for class, but I chalked it up to me forgetting as a result of having to get up early and being focused on getting to class on time. Arguably paranoid, I started to think that some of my laundry was disappearing as well, as favorite articles of clothing would go into the laundry hamper and seemingly never come back with the clean clothes. Towards the end of that semester, I was working one evening on a homework assignment when my boyfriend called to let me know his roommate had accidentally locked him out of their apartment. I had a key to their place, so he asked if I could run over real quick to let him in. Before I left, I made a mental note that I had left literally every light in my apartment on, because I was living on a pretty tight budget. I normally made a point of turning off all the lights when I left, but my boyfriend only lived about 5 minutes away, so I knew I'd be there and back very quickly. Sure enough, I got back less than 15 minutes later. I immediately sensed something was off, as I could see the lights were off through the blinds. I called my boyfriend and he drove over to meet me. We unlocked the door and went in. All the lights were off in my apartment. Thinking maybe I had a power outage, I flipped on the main light and it came on. My boyfriend checked the entire apartment. No one was inside, but someone had gone through and systematically turned off every light at their switch, including my lizard's basking light, the only light I always left on because it was on a timer, and my laptop, which I'd left open on my assignment, but now the computer had been powered down and closed. We called the emergency maintenance number and I explained that someone had been inside my apartment and that they had used the key because there was no sign of forced entry. The manager called me back and told me I had to be imagining things. Maybe I had forgotten that I had turned off the lights before I left. I assured him that I wouldn't have turned off the computer or the lizard light. Someone had been in my apartment. I told him I was extremely worried. because obviously this person had a key to get in. Either they worked for the complex or maybe it was a previous tenant slash guest. I asked if they had changed the locks after the previous tenant moved out, and they assured me they changed the locks after every move out. The manager suggested maybe it was a friend pranking me, someone else I had given a key. The only other people I had given keys were my boyfriend. His key to my apartment had been locked inside his apartment on the same keyring as his own apartment key, and my mom. She lived 3 hours away. In any case, neither of them would have pranked me in this way. The manager finally agreed to send someone out immediately to change the lock for my peace of mind. I brought up my concern that it was someone else on the staff since they would be the only other people with keys. The manager claimed the keys were locked in a special safe that required a personalized code to track who took the keys and when in an office with a security camera. They changed my locks, but I had my doubts that it would do much good. As far as I was aware, there were only 2 maintenance men that worked at the complex. One nice, older man that didn't seem all that skilled, and a younger guy with a scruffy beard that gave me a bad feeling. I suspected he had been the only one that had come in. When I had first moved in, the manager had told me I would be getting a new kitchen counter within the first 3 days. I waited to move in my kitchen stuff, but after a week they hadn't come. And then after a few months, I had completely forgot about it. One day I was sitting in my living room and this scruffy maintenance guy walked in without knocking or announcing himself. And I hadn't received a notice to expect him. He said he was there to replace my countertop. It took him 2 days to install one small piece of counter. A few weeks later, I was getting out of the shower and heard a single knock at the door. I called out, "Just 1 minute," and hurried to get some clothes. Not 2 seconds later, the door started to open and I had to slam it shut, still wrapped in a towel, to stop him from coming in. He claimed he hadn't heard me call out, but I had my doubts. I don't remember what made up excuse he had for coming in. Another time I found a note from him that he had come in, but that he'd make sure not to let my cats out. He also made a note about my third cat being cute, except I didn't have a third cat. I did, however, have a picture of my childhood cat in my bedroom on the IKEA shelf where I kept my clothes. At that point, I went to the office to ask them to make a note in my file that I wanted at least 24 hours notice before entry going forward, and always wanted to be present for future entry. Now that I knew without a shadow of doubt that someone else was coming in secretly, it all made sense. It hadn't been long after the surprise maintenance visit stopped that things had started moving around in my apartment. He was also on site all the time, so he would know when I came in and went. Who would know how many times he snuck in? How many small souvenirs he had stolen? He could have been coming in while I was asleep. After the night with the lights, I put my own lock on the door but still didn't totally trust the apartment. I ended up buying a condo shortly after, subleased the apartment, and moved. In the final days before I left, my mom came into town to help me move my stuff. While she was home alone, I was at class. She caught the scruffy maintenance man trying to get his key to work in my lock. She demanded to know what he was doing and he said he was there to paint the front door. I hadn't received a notice, and he didn't even have any paint or supplies. She told him he could wait until after I had moved out. A few years later, I was shot by the owner of Paradise Apartments while working at another complex in town, OK Apartments. Shopping is when an employee from one apartment complex takes a tour at another apartment complex under the guise of wanting an apartment for the purpose of gaining information they might not otherwise easily give up. It can also be performed by your own management company to make sure you're doing a good job. There were certain tells a shopper always gave, like asking specifically worded questions. Is it safe here? I'm a felon, can I live here? Etc. That required specifically worded answers and were easily to trip up on. Being too wealthy for the complex, Rolex watch, sports car, nice suit, etc. And being too flexible in what they were interested in. They were interested in all the layouts and were open to move in whenever. This guy seemed too old and too well off to be randomly considering an apartment at OK. While I was giving the tour, he asked if I had any opinions on other apartment complexes in town and mentioned Paradise specifically. Normally I wouldn't badmouth any other complexes. I prefer to win them over by showing them the positives of our community, but I had told him that I probably wasn't the best person to answer that question. because I was probably the only person to give Paradise a bad review in the last 5 years. He asked me to elaborate, and I told him my apartment had been broken into and I suspected it was someone on their maintenance staff. At that point, he revealed that he was the owner of Paradise and that he was very disturbed to hear I'd had this experience. He asked me to describe the maintenance man in detail. I assured him it was in the past and I was over it, but he insisted on calling the manager over at Paradise. Still the same guy. So I asked him over the speakerphone if they had any issues with the maintenance staff back in the year I had lived there. He answered yes. There had been a scruffy young maintenance man. He had to be fired because he'd been caught multiple times breaking into apartments of single women. Satisfied, the owner proudly told me the issue had been resolved and asked if I would be willing to change my review. I told him no. None of this had changed the fact I'd experienced this and actually validated what I had suspected. In the years I worked as a leasing agent, I learned a lot about when complexes will cut corners to save time and money. From my experience, a lot of complexes did not switch out the locks if the tenant was good, and a lot did not require background checks for employees even though they did require them for tenants. Keys also got passed out willy-nilly to vendors and maintenance during churns, and employees frequently got master keys that would open all doors. I won't go as far as to say every complex operates this way, but every complex I worked at was doing this when I had started there. Because of my own experiences, once I began managing a complex, I enforced strict rules about changing locks, tracking keys, posting proper notices, and requiring background checks for all employees and tenants. At least here in Florida, with Maya's law going into effect this year, background checks for employees and security measures for keys are required for all complexes. Even still, if you're renting an apartment, stay diligent. If you have a reason to believe someone is coming into your home, document it and let the staff, police, family, friends know. You never know who might have a key to your apartment. First of all, this is my first post, and I am from a Spanish-speaking country, so my English can be a little rough at times. So about 12 years ago, I was 9 years old, and I was home alone with my 12-year-old brother. We were supposed to go to my aunt's house to have lunch and wait for my mother there. We got up at 10:30 a.m. I took a shower and did my brother. After that, we were both in the bathroom brushing our teeth and finishing up when we heard someone knocking at our door. Since every time someone knocked at our door, they turned out to be a salesman or Jehovah's Witnesses. We kind of waited for them to go away. After a couple of minutes, I went to see if they were still outside through the window and no one was there. What a relief. We continued getting ready when we saw a shadow go by through the bathroom window, which was kind of like a small square made with that kind of glass that makes everything behind it really blurry. We waited and saw in case it was just a bird flying by when they hand hit it. Clear as day. We got scared. We didn't know what to do. My brother had his cell phone, so he immediately called the police. While it was ringing, we heard a loud bang at the door. Someone was brute forcing it. I don't know if they were kicking it or ramming it, but it was one of the most frightening things I've ever heard. My brother told me to lock the bathroom door, so I did. It took 5 bangs so the perpetrator could finally bash open the door. Then the police answered. I remember the exact thing my brother said. He was whispering. His voice could barely be heard. Hello? There's someone in our house. I think they are stealing. Then a pause. We are at our address. Another pause. I'm with my little brother locked in our bathroom. Please hurry. While all that, I was sitting against the wall, hugging my knees. It wasn't the most nerve-wracking experience as ever. I could hear the man going through all of our stuff, emptying stands, going up down the stairs, opening cabinets. He even broke a few cups and plates. Then I heard the sound my cell phone does when it turns off, and I remember leaving it on the kitchen table. I felt so stupid for leaving it there. Things continued for a couple of minutes when we heard him trying to open the door to the bathroom. My brother got a hold of a big metal rod we had lying around there. He started kicking the door. Who's there? The man screamed. We said nothing. Another kick. Then another. I felt I was about to have an anxiety attack. My chest started to ache. I had chills and was really hot. I tried to remain calm, but it was just too much. After that, he stopped. We heard the door opening and then silence. We waited for almost 10 minutes before going out of the bathroom. The living room was a total mess, lots of papers and books on the floor. The cabinets were open, cups and plates on the floor. In our mother's bedroom, the nightstand, and the closet were open and everything inside them was all over the place. Upstairs in our room, it was the same thing. In about 5 minutes, the man was able to go through everything we had and left a total mess. After that, my brother called my mom and she ordered us to go to my aunt's ASAP, so we did. When we got there, I was a little more relaxed. My aunt was waiting with ice cream, probably because my mom told her everything and she wanted to calm us down a bit. We went back home at about 5 o'clock. My mom told her boss she had a home emergency, so she left early. She tidied up the house, cleaned up, and left everything the way it was before so we could be relaxed. I really appreciate her effort and my aunts to calm us down and do everything so we didn't have to think about it. According to my mom, the police got home after she arrived at 3 o'clock. She explained everything, but because of lack of evidence, nothing could be done. The man was never caught, and honestly, I don't think they even tried to search for him. The next days, my mom was home with us. Now I tell the story as a funny anecdote. Luckily, no one was hurt, and he only took useless stuff. But at the time, I was really scared. To a 9-year-old, an experience like that can have serious repercussions. I'm lucky it never came to that, and I got over that after a couple of weeks. So yeah, that is my story.